The moment I stepped back into that house, I understood everything. The weekend bag by the coat rack. The second coffee mug on the counter. The way my husband's voice dropped half an octave when he said, "You weren't supposed to come back today." He wasn't wrong about that part. I had left the night before with 2 suitcases and no explanation that made any sense. After 11 years of marriage, my husband had sat across from me at our kitchen table in Oakville and told me, very calmly, the way you might discuss a change in insurance providers, that he didn't think our marriage was working anymore. He said he had been unhappy for a long time. He said he needed space to figure things out. He said a lot of words that, strung together, meant absolutely nothing and everything at the same time. Then he slid his wedding band off his finger and set it on the table between us. I remember staring at it. That ring had been on his hand for 11 years. I had watched it catch the light on our wedding day in Niagara-on-the-Lake. I had seen it tap against steering wheels and kitchen counters and my own hand when he reached for me in the dark. And now it was just sitting there on the table next to a half-eaten plate of pasta, like a quarter he had found in his pocket and decided he didn't need. He asked for mine. "I want to tell you," I said, something sharp and clear, something that would have made a good story later. I didn't. I was too stunned. My hands were shaking when I took it off, and I set it down next to his without a word because I genuinely did not have one. He told me the house was in his name. Technically true. His parents had owned it before us, and when we bought them out after his mother passed, the deed had stayed in his name. We had always meant to sort it out properly. We just never did. Another thing we had meant to do and didn't. He said he thought it would be easier if I stayed somewhere else while we worked through things. He said, worked through things, the way people say it when they have already worked through things and have arrived at a decision they are not planning to share with you yet. I packed. I don't remember packing, honestly. I moved through our bedroom on some kind of autopilot, pulling clothes off hangers and folding them badly into suitcases while he stayed downstairs. At one point, I heard him pour himself a glass of wine. I remember thinking that was strange. I remember thinking a lot of strange, disconnected things that night. My sister lives in Burlington, 20 minutes east, and she picked up on the first ring when I called from the driveway. She had the guest room ready by the time I got there. She didn't ask a lot of questions. She just made tea and sat with me at her kitchen island while I stared at the wall and tried to understand what had just happened to my life. I didn't sleep. At some point past 2 in the morning, I started going through what I had packed and realized I was missing something important. There was a small cedar box I kept in the top drawer of my nightstand. It had our passports in it, my grandmother's watch, the deed to a small piece of land in Prince Edward Island that had been in my family for 3 generations, and a USB drive with scanned copies of every important document I owned. I had completely forgotten it. I knew I needed to go back for it. The next morning, I drove to Oakville. It was a Thursday in late October, gray and cold, the way that part of the province gets in fall. That low, flat gray that settles in off the lake. I told myself he would probably be at work. His firm was in downtown Toronto, and he usually left before 8. I got there just after 9. His car was still in the driveway. I sat outside for a moment. Then I got out anyway, because I needed that box, and because some part of me had started to feel something shift overnight. The shock was still there, but underneath it, something harder had begun to form. I wasn't sure what it was yet. I unlocked the front door with my key. I heard her laughing before I saw her. It was a bright, easy laugh, the kind of laugh that belongs to someone who is completely comfortable where they are. It was coming from the kitchen. I stood in the front hallway and I did not move. For a few seconds, I genuinely could not. I walked toward the sound. She was sitting at my kitchen table. Our kitchen table, the oak one we had argued about in a furniture store in Mississauga and eventually agreed on because it had these clean lines we both liked. She was sitting at it in a cream-colored sweater that I slowly realized was not her sweater. It was the one I had given him last Christmas. The one from the Hudson's Bay Company, the heavier knit one he wore on Sunday mornings. She had a mug of coffee in both hands, and she was mid-sentence when I walked through the doorway. She stopped talking. He was standing at the counter. He turned around. For a moment, none of us said a word. He looked at me the way you look at a weather event. Like something inconvenient that wasn't in the forecast. "You weren't supposed to come back today," he said. I looked at him. I looked at her. I looked at the bag near the back door, a large weekender with a floral print I didn't recognize. I looked at the second mug on the counter, the one he had clearly been about to refill. I looked at the way she had folded her legs up under herself on the chair, comfortable and settled, the posture of someone who had been there before. "I forgot something," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. She started to stand. He put a hand up toward her, this small, instinctive gesture, and I watched her stop and sit back down. That gesture told me more than anything either of them could have said. It was the gesture of someone managing a situation they had practiced managing. "This isn't what it looks like," he said. I didn't respond to that. There wasn't anything to respond to. I turned and walked down the hall to the bedroom, and I opened the nightstand drawer, and I took my cedar box. I also took a moment to look around the room. The bed was made, but not the way I made it. There were 2 indentations in a travel-sized bottle of something on the nightstand that was not mine. She had been there since the night before, which meant that within hours of asking me to leave, he had called her. Or she had been waiting for him to ask. I walked back out to the kitchen. He was standing in the same spot. She had disappeared, gone to another room to wait things out, which was either considerate or strategic, and I suspected the latter. "How long?" I said. It wasn't really a question. He looked at the floor. "It's complicated. That's not what I asked." He rubbed the back of his neck. "A few months." Something in my expression must have told him I didn't believe that, because he exhaled and said, "Longer." I nodded slowly. "How much longer?" He didn't answer right away. And in that pause, which lasted maybe 4 seconds, I did a rapid calculation in my head. The business trips to Calgary that had started maybe 18 months ago. The phone always face down on the coffee table. The way he had started going to the gym at odd hours. The way he stopped asking about my day, not all at once but gradually, the way a tide goes out. You don't notice it until you're standing somewhere dry that used to be underwater. "Almost 2 years," he said finally. "Almost 2 years. I had been working a demanding contract that year, 60-hour weeks at a healthcare consulting firm downtown. I was exhausted all the time. I told myself he was just tired too. I told myself we were in one of those flat stretches that happen to every marriage after a decade. I told myself we would get our rhythm back once my project wrapped. I had spent 2 years explaining away a marriage that had already ended. I looked around the kitchen, and then I noticed something that almost seemed ordinary in the context of everything else. There was a folder on the counter, a thick one, the kind with the elastic band closure. It was sitting beside the fruit bowl, next to his keys and a Tim Hortons receipt, and it would have been easy to miss. But I have always been someone who notices paper. I work in consulting. I notice documents. I walked over and picked it up. "Don't," he said. His voice sharpened in a way it hadn't until that moment. I opened it anyway. Inside was a stack of papers. Property assessment for the Oakville house. Dated 8 months ago. A spreadsheet printed out, showing 2 columns of financial figures, assets on one side, and what appeared to be projected liabilities on the other. A printed email chain that I didn't have time to read in full, but could see was between him and a lawyer. Because the email signature had family law in it. A bank statement for an account I did not recognize in his name at a financial institution we did not share. He had been building a legal case around our marriage for nearly a year. While I was working 60-hour weeks and eating dinner alone half the time and telling myself we just needed a vacation, he had been consulting a family lawyer and opening a separate account and documenting our shared assets and doing all of the quiet, methodical work of ending a marriage legally before he ended it personally. The dinner the night before had not been a decision. It had been a conclusion. I set the folder down. I took out my phone. He said, "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. I photographed every page in that folder. He stepped toward me and I looked up at him and something in my face made him stop. I don't know what it was. I think it was the fact that I had stopped being shocked. I think shock looks different from clarity, and he could tell the difference. I finished photographing the documents. I picked up my cedar box. I walked to the front door. "We can handle this like adults," he said behind me. I turned around one last time. "You've been handling it for a year without telling me," I said. "I think I'll take over from here." I drove back to my sister's house in Burlington, and I sat at her kitchen island again, but this time I was not staring at the wall. I was on my phone. I called my own family lawyer, a woman I had met through a friend of a friend 2 years earlier at a fundraiser for the Trillium Health Partners Foundation. I had her card in my wallet because she had seemed sharp, and I had thought, in some vague background way, that it was probably good to know a family lawyer. I had never imagined I would use it. She picked up within 2 rings. I told her what I had: the photographs of the documents, the separate bank account, the timeline, the fact that he had been consulting her counterpart for approximately 12 months before asking me to leave. She was quiet for a moment when I finished. "Can you come in tomorrow morning?" she said. I said yes. Over the next several weeks, a more complete picture emerged. The account I had photographed had been opened 19 months earlier. Not long after his Calgary trip started, he had been making small, regular transfers into it. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger obvious alarm, just steady and consistent, the way someone saves up for something they have been planning for a long time. He had also apparently told a number of people, colleagues, a couple of mutual friends, his brother, that the marriage had run its course, and that he had been trying to make it work for years. He had been building a narrative, a quiet, sympathetic one, in which he was someone who had struggled privately and finally found the courage to leave. The problem with that narrative was the timeline. Because when my lawyer started asking questions and documents started coming out in disclosure, it became clear that his relationship with the woman I had found in my kitchen had not begun 2 years ago. It had begun almost 3. He had met her at a conference in Vancouver. He had maintained it through every anniversary dinner, and every weekend in cottage country, and every conversation we had ever had about the future. Mutual friends who had only heard his version started hearing mine. I did not set out to correct the record publicly. I am not that kind of person. But I did tell the truth when people asked, and the truth had a way of clarifying things quickly. His carefully constructed story did not survive contact with the actual facts. I found an apartment in Hamilton in November. Ground floor of a converted Victorian on a street lined with maples. It was smaller than what I was used to, and it needed a new coat of paint, and the radiators made noise at night, and I loved it immediately. I bought a small couch from a woman on Facebook Marketplace, and 2 good lamps from a thrift shop in Westdale, and a kitchen table that was just mine. I went back to work full-time in January. My project had been on hold, and my firm was glad to have me back. And the work was steadying in a way I hadn't expected. I started therapy, Tuesday evenings, with a woman whose office was above a bakery on King Street West. And I would sometimes sit on the curb afterward and eat a croissant and just breathe. The legal process took most of the following year. Ontario family law looks at the matrimonial home differently than people sometimes expect. Even when one person holds the deed, equalization of net family property means the value gets divided. My lawyer was thorough. The financial documents I had photographed that morning were useful in a way that my husband had not anticipated when he left them on the kitchen counter. The separate account, the documented asset summary, the email chain with his lawyer. All of it painted a picture of someone who had been planning a unilateral exit for close to a year, and that picture had weight in mediation. He settled. There was a moment near the end of all of it when I ran into an old colleague who knew us both from back when we used to host dinner parties in Oakville. She hugged me and said she was sorry and asked how I was doing. I told her honestly, better than I expected. She said, "I always thought you were the stronger one." I didn't know what to say to that. I had never thought of it that way. I had thought of myself as the one who didn't see it coming. But I had seen things coming for a long time. I just kept believing what I wanted to believe. Because the alternative felt too large to sit with. The late nights, the trips, the way he stopped reaching for my hand in movie theaters. The cold politeness that replaced a warmth I had once taken completely for granted. I had watched all of it arrive, piece by piece, and filed it under going through something, and just a rough patch, and we'll be fine. I was wrong about that. But I was not wrong about myself. The woman I was, when I sat in my sister's kitchen at 2 a.m, stunned, cup of tea going cold, still wearing my coat because I had forgotten to take it off. That woman was real. The grief was real. The years were real. And walking away from all of it and rebuilding from scratch in a rented apartment in Hamilton with secondhand furniture and Tuesday evening therapy and croissants on the curb, that was also real. My husband spent nearly 3 years carefully, quietly building a life that did not include me. He thought he had a head start. He thought he had accounted for everything. He forgot about the cedar box. He forgot that I noticed documents. And he forgot that the woman he had underestimated for the last 3 years of her marriage was the same woman who would walk into a family lawyer's office the following morning with photographs of every page he had tried to hide, ready to handle things herself. He thought he was leaving me with nothing. He was wrong. He was leaving someone who had loved him, honestly, for 11 years, without reservation. And in the end, I am the one who got to keep that.